Welcome to the Total Acre Podcast. I'm your host, Chad Scebold. This podcast is all about helping growers unlock their potential. We aim to bring listeners agronomic insights, valuable educational interviews, real-world strategies that optimize yield and maximize ROI. This show is going to explore innovative practices, creative strategies, and breakthrough products with people that are shaping the industry, all through engaging and inspiring stories. Who better to learn from than the legendary world champion David Hula, Randy Dowdy, and Alex Harrell? Because in farming and in life, iron always sharpens iron. And the best way to grow or get better is to continually be learning, networking with peers, have access to industry leaders, and the tools, tips, and tricks, and overall quality of information. Knowledge is power. Tune in, hit play. Let's unlock your farm's potential together. Hey y'all, Chad Scebold here with Total Acre Podcast. I'm excited. Listen, it's getting hot outside. I've got one of my guests on here today that we're going to talk about everything fertilizer, micronutrients, and some of the things like most folks are getting ready to start doing some fertility in the field. Corn's knee high or higher, way ahead of 4th of July. Stephanie Zelinko, AgroLiquid. Thanks for joining us today. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. I'm excited to be here.
Listen, we've been around each other a few different times now, and every time I'm around you always have a fun story from your farm. So we won't get into all the fun, challenging stories today, but your background as a producer up in Michigan is kind of how this game started.
It is. I grew up on a farm, like many people in the ag industry, starting with that, family farm background. My dad and uncle raised a lot of seed, so got my start with a lot of different test plots and trials, and it kind of built my love for agriculture. Went to Michigan State, got my degree, and then married a farmer, and so I still continue on. We do a lot of on-farm research there, always trying to improve and find out what products are going to fit my operation to give us more yield and more return on investment. So that's kind of what I do in my everyday life for career, and then come home and do the exact same thing with the home farming operation.
I love it. Not afraid to get a little bit of dirt on your boots, and actually that's kind of probably where you thrive, right?
It is. That's where you're most happy, is being outside and trying to figure out those missing links.
Well, you did say Michigan, but I remember faintly there was like a state at the end, so it's not the blue and yellow; it's the really the good green and white.
Yes, absolutely. I'm a Spartan, so Michigan State green and white, not that other school further south.
They do. Do they have another school up there? I guess I'm not familiar with that, right? But it's good to have you. I haven't been up there yet, but I'm excited to get up there here pretty soon to see the facilities. I understand, like again, from the back side of things, a couple hundred employees now, from starting in 1983-ish. So
yes,
the company's 40 some odd years old now ish. You got your own in-house labs, over 200 people. Place is just bumping.
We do, and that's kind of a unique thing that we have compared to other people in the industry, is we do everything in-house. So we have, all the manufacturing, we do all the marketing, all the research, all the sales, we do everything. We have a complete IT team. Over 100, 150 people. And then that spreads out, nationwide to our sales reps. So we cover every state in the US plus Canada and Mexico. So a good sales team, that are company employees, along with those independent retailers that represent our company and our products.
Well, and I think, again, for maybe the name wise, if people haven't heard of AgroLiquid, come out from underneath the rock, but one of the flagship products that I think everybody's probably pretty familiar with is the SureK products. But within Total Acre, we're kind of exposed to all kinds of different things. And we appreciate the partnership because you know how David and Randy in the group is, especially Brian Maddox. He pushes the envelope pretty hard and says, hey, you know what? If things are challenged, we want to make sure that we can get them better, right? And I think you do a really good job with bringing new products to market, expanding your, I guess I would call it product portfolio, and working together with you on that's been exciting over the last 3-4 years.
We do. And, we've enjoyed the partnership with the whole entire Total Acre crew. Do a really good job of getting us those fields and those locations we need to prove that our products work. And the thing that we do at AgroLiquid is we do have a complete line of liquid nutrition. So we have NPK micros, you mentioned SureK, but we have all those secondary and micronutrients as well. And that gives us the opportunity to walk into a grower's operation, look at a soil test, look at his tissue test, and then figure out what that missing piece might be. We would love to say use every AgroLiquid product, but that's not reality. There's going to be one or two products that fit each farmer's operation specifically, and that's what we go in and focus with. And Total Acre has really helped us with that by providing good soil data, good tissue data, that we can actually pick and choose, for a grower what product's going to help him the best in his operation.
Well, in your background with research too, right? I mean, too, when a product's challenged, you're in this thing to be able to provide solutions that work. And I think that is unique, and not to pump your tires up too much, but when you start looking at things that are challenged, it's, I guess, working with a guy like Brian Maddox and the technology YMS within Total Acre, we can really see where the challenges are, make recommendations to be able to get those products, I guess, evolved into something that maybe can be enhanced to work differently.
Right. And, we do a lot of data internally. You mentioned we have a research farm. We also do research with you guys and a number of contract researchers across the country. And that helps build our database of research. And so that lets us pick, what products work the best. And we focus really heavily on win rates. Any of your guys that have seen us present at, your clinics see that we talk heavily on win rates, because everything can win in 1 year in one field, but it continue to do that year after year. And then how is this year's economics compared to 2 or 3 years ago? Will that product be successful under different market conditions? So we analyze all that data and have that so it's fluid. We can change it with today's markets and help growers make those decisions.
Well, your biggest critic probably is your farmer husband, right? So if you bring a product back to the farm and he's like, Steph, what are you doing? This thing, right? Come on, right? That's the best kind of research when you can use it on your own operation.
Right. That's the challenging part is your family is always the hardest person to sell to, because they're going to be the most critical and tell you how it, really is. But I think in general, farmers do a good job. Like, they want things to be successful for them. And if it doesn't work, now with all the social media and, education sessions like this, we can be more open and say, yes, it worked for me, or no, it did not. And know that every product's not going to work for every grower. And so we got to find and put it and position it into that right place.
Well, I love that again, you're not afraid to be challenged, whether it's your husband or Brian and Bryce. They do a really good job on the backside of this thing with the growers, right? Because listen, if it's a product that you have on a farm and the reps are out in that farm, I'll use like Steven Schuster is one of the guys that you've worked with in the past, and some of the stuff that we've done with products there's a handful of growers that aren't afraid to ask those hard questions, I guess, that within the network. And I think that that's probably a part of Brian Maddox kind of training the growers to be able to actually make an environment that's welcoming for the vendor to be able to collaborate, right? I think that's like CROs, not knocking CROs, right? But like, they are literally paid to do this research and provide a product. I think on real farms, real producers, you get a different type of feedback, right? It's not just a spreadsheet. It's like a feel of, and I think that's the unique thing with our relationship. And I cherish that.
Well, there's other things that go into it. Yield in return is one thing, but is the product easy to use for the grower? Does it mix with the other products in his fertilizer blend or his crop protection blend? So there's a lot more feedback you can get back working directly with growers than you do working just strictly with researchers.
So let's dive in. Yeah, absolutely. Let's dive into a couple different products, because again, some of the things I think that you've been challenged with is the same thing that producers are challenged with. And we'll just talk micronutrients for now. I know you have a whole lineup of other products with Fertility, but I think you've done a really good job evolving your products on the chemistry side of things to bring the fertility side of things, I guess, to enhance that. And so one of the things that it's the zinc product that we've worked with, and I think that's been the last couple of years, but talk about a zinc product. Why is it important? What have you been able to do with that microlink zinc?
Well, microlink zinc and really all of our micronutrients and many of our products are kind of backboned with unique technology, which we label as Nutriq. That's the trade name for our technology. But really, ultimately, what that means is we're just working hard to make those nutrients more available to the plant. So we do different things between, protections, chelation, encapsulation, to get really sciencey. But essentially, all that means is we're protecting them so they're not going to be lost in the environment, and that they're readily available for that crop when it needs it. So we did a lot of work. Randy challenged us a couple of years ago during a presentation to look at the correlation between a foliar application and increasing that tissue level parts per million of those micronutrients. So we use zinc. That was probably the one we tested the most, did a lot of work on that, and did a couple of different rates and then monitored to see which one was going to increase those, and is it a linear line? If you apply more, does that tissue level increase more? And we really didn't see a linear response, but we did find, putting a 2 to 3 quart rate out there of zinc very significantly increased and held those tissue tests, 4 or 5 weeks past application.
I love it. And I had a chance to co-review that with Brian Maddox and their team, actually before this call last week. And it was interesting to see that it is not the moron approach, right? And I know that gets used a lot, but what is, and I'll ask you this in a different form, but what makes it more plant available, right? And there's only micro amounts of that can be used by the plant. So more is not better, right?
Right.
So I think one thing that I'd challenge you with here today is, everybody talks about how do we make something more plant available. So maybe talk a little bit what you can in terms of like the technology that, enhances that ability for that plant to uptake nutrients.
Yes. So I started that, we use that Nutriq technology to protect it. So it is a plant protein that we will use to enhance those fertilizers that stops those interactions. So there's positive, negative charges, nutrients, as well as in the soil and in the plant. So we're just kind of stopping that magnet connection. We're binding it with an organic protein to make sure that it's held to that. With time, temperature, weather, that protein breaks down, and then it provides nutrition for the crop. Above and beyond that, if you look at our product line, for the most part, they're not all straight products. We mentioned SureK earlier. That's a potassium product, but it also contains nitrogen and phosphorus. So you get a synergistic effect that, we're focusing on potassium, but, nutrients work better with somebody else. So we're having that nitrogen and that phosphorus to help make that work better. We also use really clean raw materials. So that just helps with the compatibility side of things. That helps make sure that we're not getting this settling out in tanks and causing any issues. So, the better we make the products, the better they are going to be able to be taken up by the plant and utilized.
One of the things when you look at, you talk about charge, right? So that sometimes things are, tied up, right? We talk about how things can get tied up. Having a technology that's out there that's proven to be able to actually place into other products, I think that's pretty cool, right? So it's something that's universally across all your product line?
It is. Almost every product. We have one or two that doesn't have, that technology built in it, but they're used for other reasons that we don't need that protection technology. But probably 95% or more of our products do contain that technology. And that's something that we've had since day one. That's what we brought to the market 40 years ago, before tie-up was talked about, before, all the environmental protection rules came on that you can't apply nutrients, or you can't apply them all in one application. You need to do split. So it's something we've been doing since the start. And in more recent years, industry is kind of catching up and following that lead we took. That's
cool. And being around as long as the company has been around, you don't look old enough to have been there for the last 28 years, but I think that's the number I heard, right? 28 years? 25. Okay. I'm not trying to add years to you, but I mean, that's pretty impressive. You've been there for the majority of the time. And in terms of like the products that have came out over that time, I use the term, or I think you guys use the term, and I read the term, high efficiency fertilizers, right? And utilizing that technology, what does that mean in the company and how you guys market that? High efficiency fertilizers.
Well, and that goes back to, if you think we are a family-owned company, so it started by our current president's grandfather and father. So we used to use the term, we're not your grandfather's fertilizer. So if you think back 40 years ago, it was a lot of dry spread, just not protected. We weren't doing all the protection to the dry products like we do now. And we said we were high efficiency, meaning we were doing things to make more of those nutrients get into the plant. We know from the industry, dry fertilizers, only 20 to 30% usable in that first year. So we were looking at, okay, we don't care what we're going to do next year or the following year. Let's make a fertilizer that can feed the plant in year one. So our efficiency is, 80 to 90% usable because we do protect it. We're not going to have that high increase of environmental loss. And so that just allows us to, improve that efficiency. We can apply lower rates. And so that's kind of the background behind that high efficiency. Is we were kind of starting out years ago compared to a dry spread. And again, industry is caught up. There's a lot of other products that are very efficient. But that was kind of how we started out in the beginning, as being more efficient than that standard of the time, which was just dry.
I love it because sometimes people read something and think something different, right? But high efficiency fertilizer, that does a good job of explaining it. I think the standard that I've heard is 30%, right? So you say 20 to 30% of all synthetics out there as far as fertility is consumed by the plant, which is crazy, right? Right. Imagine going out to a store and buying something, then 30% of that time, or 70% of the time, it's not going to work. Whatever it is you're buying, which is crazy, right?
Right. And with us, you never know. Are we going to have, that farmland next year? As farmland changes, like, rent becomes, if you're renting land, becomes more challenging. If you are in areas where you have a lot of urban sprawl, like it could be a grocery store or housing development next year. So, putting dry out that might feed 2 to 3 years later, isn't maybe the best investment if you don't know if you're going to have that farmland long term.
100%. Great point. When you think of high efficiency fertilizers and you think of where we're at right now in season, I understand Maddox and I were talking last week, and he took Trick from somewhere around Cleveland up into Michigan. He's like, Ohio's got nothing, right? Michigan looks good. So the variability across the U.S., as people are watching this, and when we talk about wide drop and nutrients, that's where we're at right now in Southwest Iowa and Nebraska. So for folks that are looking for opportunities, what is something this time of season, if guys are wide dropping or looking for fertility options, what is it that you suggest? Obviously, testing and knowing where you're at, but what are a lot of folks using?
Right. Yeah. The first thing is always look at your soil test. But when I think of wide drop application, the kind of 2 nutrients that work well with that nitrogen that you're probably already putting out, sulfur, number 1. Number 2, a close second, would be potassium. And so, those are the ones that tend to be more limiting. The east part of the U.S. that show that best return. If we're looking, further west in the country, potassium isn't quite as critical. But even in those high K soils, we do see a pretty good response from some low rate potassium out there.
And years like this too, I'll go back to the efficiency, right? High efficient, right? Which more plant available nutrients for every dollar we spend. It's always important, but this year more than ever. And I'll ask you from a product standpoint, and I'm going to challenge you on that. For a wide drop application, what does somebody use? You talk about, what are the product names, I guess, more specifically? You talk about sulfur and you talk about potassium, but for somebody that wants to research a product, what is that product?
Yep. From the AgroLiquid product line, Access is going to be the best sulfur application. And we did some work with a couple of your growers a couple of seasons ago, looking at Access, both through pivot applied and wide drop. So that works really well. It's a 17% sulfur. It also has some micronutrients in there, again, to help with that synergistic effect of nutrient uptake. Not huge rates, but just trace amounts of those micros. The other product would be would be Calibrate. And Calibrate's a combination of potassium and sulfur. So for those guys that need that potassium, that's probably my number 1 go-to product, is that you can get some additional potassium, you can get some additional sulfur, and hit kind of those 2 key nutrients with that nitrogen application.
I think that's great. Thanks for highlighting that. But one of the things inside of Total Acre, again, kind of the challenge is you see you're deficient, right? So we talk about NPR within Total Acre, and now all of a sudden we see deficiencies, making the application 2-3 weeks down the line. When are we seeing that uptake, right? So I love the recommendations, but I love having the tools. What David always talks about, you can't adjust what you can't measure, and that's
right.
where really Total Acre does some really cool stuff.
Right. Yeah, you guys get a good early start, to see those drop before it becomes, like, if you see deficiency, you're already losing yield. So it's good to get it earlier to retain as much of that yield as you can.
I had a call last week, and the guy was talking about, short on potassium. I'm sorry, short on phosphorus. And, traditionally your MAP-DAP MES guys, it's all, pre-play. There's really an in-season, not really an opportunity. There are some products out there, right? And they were looking for some different products. I know you probably can't talk much about it, but we're doing some really cool stuff with some experimental stuff. If you could talk about, in-season phos, what's that looking like this year?
Yeah, so the other method that we haven't talked about yet is foliar application. And so, kind of the cool thing that we're doing is we always have an innovation line looking for new products. So we always have 5 or 6 products in the pipeline. And one that's kind of nearing the end of launch, meaning we put it out in field trials beyond our own, is a foliar phosphorus. So that's the product that we have out with you guys this year. You don't typically think of phosphorus as being a foliar product. There's some challenges of getting good uptake of that. But I think we found a pretty good solution right now. And so we're trying to see if we can see some additional benefits, both on a corn crop and a soybean crop.
That's a very PC way of saying they've got a product they're really excited about. And the Total Acre growers that are using it are excited to see the results. And hopefully we can get those here at Grower Clinic. I guess that's not too far away. It'll be here before we know it in February.
For
right? Sure. Talk a little bit about that innovation. I think you call it innovation line.
Yes.
Really, it's about constantly evolving, getting better. So I coach little girls softball, right? And I talk about, hey, getting better every day, right? You can't hit the broadside of a barn now, but hey, in a week or 2 or a month, right? Like continue to get better every day. And I think from a innovation standpoint, you look at the opportunity of getting better, right? Or bringing new products to the market. Having that in-house is everything, right? Being able to do that.
Yeah, we have a full innovation team. So the chemistry side, the product development side, plus all the people that take it out to the field to test it. And we kind of look at it as a twofold. Number one, how can we improve our existing products? And number two, what's something new we can bring to the industry? And so we had one product capitalized that we had earlier in release a couple of years ago, but it had a really high freezing point, which didn't make it very feasible for many growers. So we worked really hard this last season to our chemistry team did to develop one that had that lower freezing point. So we do things like that to try to improve our own products, but then we also look at bringing things like this foliar phosphorus to market that would fill a missing piece in our current line of product offerings.
Talk a little bit about, so obviously you guys farm, right? You and your husband farm, but the farmer innovation side of it, right? So, farmer grade to me is, like, gosh, I need this. How do I get it? A company like you that is open and listening, right? I know our growers appreciate that. I'm sure your husband's saying, hey, I want this product. Yeah, sure. We'll get that. We'll get that. But being able to listen as a company, as a producer is looking for opportunities. Tell me how you receive feedback, how you work with growers on that.
We really want feedback. Innovation is hard, especially when we already have, every nutrient that's needed by the crop. We're not going to develop a new nutrient that a plant needs. So we need to think outside the box and figure out better ways to utilize the existing nutrients we have. And so we really encourage our sales team and our agronomy team to talk to the growers out in the field, or as we work with groups like you guys, of what do you want? What do you want to see in the industry? And then we take that information back to our innovation team. And they have a lot of products that they can try to make. And they usually make 2 or 3 versions of it and then narrow it down to which one works well. We test everything internally at our research farm in our greenhouse first. And then once, it gets past those couple stages, then we take it out to the field to those growers to say, okay, this is what you asked for. Now let's see if it will really work and help your situation.
Well, and I think that's, that to me makes me feel good as a producer, right? That my voice is heard. One of the things that is unique, and again, not to highlight everything we're doing within Total Acre, but, Brian has 480 trials this year. He's working with 150 different growers. I've seen the growers come to your booth and you guys get inundated with growers saying, hey, this, but hey, we always want what we can't have, right? You have great products. They're there, they're working, and now they're always looking for the next iteration of that. And I think, again, maybe if I were to highlight some of the things that Total Acre does, I think that's what this membership group's all about, right? It is real producers that want different opportunities to get better, and working with companies like AgroLiquid is certainly an advantage for that group. What's the challenge you see coming up? Obviously, markets are challenging, right? But what's the challenge you're seeing this year? Or you're hearing from growers across the U.S. Is there any common threads?
Well, I think the common thread is like we have every year, there's weather issues somewhere. So we can never control Mother Nature. I think this year compared to other years, beyond the market side, I think there's a lot more late planting than we've had in the past. And, maybe that's just the geographies I've talked to. Michigan, we're a little bit behind, but I wouldn't say, too hugely behind, but I know people still planting corn further south of us in states further south of us, which to me, we're approaching July. It's getting kind of late to, start putting a full season corn crop in. So I think always Mother Nature is going to be our biggest challenge. Too much rain, not enough rain, storms, that's always going to be our biggest challenge. And that's hard to control. So you just have to kind of roll with it and look at, different things that you can do, whether it's crop protection or fertility, to try to make the best out of that hand you've been dealt for the year.
We're in a unique spot right now, right? Because we were wet. I think I've actually seen a planter rolling down the road the other day. So there's some prevent plant happening, or guys are just kind of stabbing some stuff in, maybe some wet spots. But now the abiotic stress on the other side of this says we're going to get hot. We're talking hundreds of degrees, hundreds. Over 100, we shouldn't say hundreds, 200 degree doesn't exist, right? But 100, 103, the next 3 or 4 days. So now you got abiotic stress. A healthy plant's a happy plant. Is there any products in the lineup that when you start looking at abiotic stress, factors that are out of our control, but a healthier plant at long term? We're obviously talking micronutrients, anything along that line.
Well, potassium is always what I think most when it comes to stress resistance, because that's going to just help with that water movement within the plant. It's going to help build good, strong cells and cell walls, which makes a stronger plant. So when you're talking any stress, once that plant's up and growing, you need to make sure you have enough potassium out there. It's going to help prevent lodging. It's going to help with that disease resistance. Potassium's kind of that medicine or that vitamin pack that's going to help the crop overall. Earlier we needed a good root system, and that's where phosphorus comes in. But wet soils kind of limits that sometimes. So sometimes you can't control that as much, but you can still come in with foliar applications. That SureK product you mentioned earlier is an excellent foliar source, both on corn and soybean, to give you that extra boost. So, you can go across with any post herbicide application or fungicide treatment, add some SureK in, and that's going to, help provide some additional vitamins there to strengthen that overall plant.
Makes sense. I live just outside Omaha. We farm just north of Omaha. And one of the things that's going on right now is the College World Series. So my dumb analogy is last night, so I'll date this, but last night LSU beat Arkansas in a baseball game where it was an error, right? It was a 5-3 game and a little pop fly runner's on. The guy drops it out in the outfield, scores 2, ties it up. Next guy comes up and hits a walk-off line drive single, and they lose. LSU is going to the championship, right? We make errors. Here's my analogy. We make errors in season, sometimes that are not correctable, right? And and I'm not saying that we should abandon a crop, but there's times where we're throwing good money after bad too, right? And I'm not saying we have all the solutions to be able to correct everything, even within Total Acre, right? There's times where if we make an error, there's nothing, you can't come back from that, right? Your bushels have been lost. Now you're talking about your 300 bushel targets are now 220, right? And there's no way to recover from some of those things. So what advice would you give to somebody that's maybe made a few errors in the season? And, how do we know when to call it on a crop? Do we continue to make that investment, right?
Yeah, I think, that's a win if you can make the decision to stop putting money at it. And, that's where you need to work with other experts in the industry, and look at what the damage is. Is it hail damage that wiped out the crop? Is there enough to try to salvage it? Or is it just, I was short nitrogen and I didn't get it out soon enough because, weather didn't allow, there's a lot of things that you can do, but there's also a point that you need to just stop and look back. I'm not going to get additional return for this. And if you want to farm next year, you need to look at that bottom line. So sometimes, you need to be happy with being uncomfortable, not getting that top yield. Everybody wants 3, 4, 5, 600 bushel corn. But, if it's a year that's only going to give you 180 bushel corn, and you're still going to make money and you're going to still farm next year, that's the best decision you can make.
That's great. And I think your producer background tells me you understand that, right? There's no reason to throw good money after bad. And, the other side of that is you're balancing the other side, which is, selling nutrients, right? So, there has to be a balance there. We want, producers to come back again and obviously buy products the next year. But in seasons like this, there are opportunities to push crops and opportunities to walk away from stuff that we know if you, my analogy of the College World Series kind of errors, right? If you're a baseball fan, maybe it makes sense. But at the end of the day, a lot of the things that you guys are doing are pretty exciting. We appreciate the partnership, and some of the things that you challenge us on too is pretty exciting. I know Brian and Bryce on the backside of this thing are always trying to get better at what they do, and you push them. So I appreciate that. For folks that are maybe hearing about what you guys are doing, maybe from the micronutrients for the first time, what's maybe one of the one things you would want to leave them with? You've said a lot. We've talked about a lot of cool different stuff, but what would be the one thing you would leave them with as they're looking to AgroLiquid this season and opportunities to work with you?
I think if you're in a growing season that you still have opportunity left, now is the perfect time to talk to somebody, show them your soil test, show them those tissue tests, and look to see what might be missing from your operation. And so there's lots of nutrients out there. Our nutrients get into the plant really quickly, very effectively. So there's still time. Some people might think I'm going into tasseling corn, I'm out of time. There's still time to, adjust that seed size and that seed fill with some nutrition. So don't give up yet if you have that opportunity, and work with somebody that knows and that can help you. Don't try to guess on your own. Farmers have to worry about a lot of things. And there's a lot of fertility experts out there that focus on that every day that can help you.
I know your research background and kind of the agronomy background, you're not necessarily in the sales world all the time, right? But if somebody wants to learn more, what's the best way for somebody to get a hold of somebody at AgroLiquid to be able to find that rep?
So on our website, which is agroliquid.com, we have an Ask the Agronomist section. So you can just jump on there and ask a question. And then that goes to our agronomy team, and they can put you in touch with any of our local sales guys that can help you find someone that can get that product directly to your farm.
I love it. I love it. Hey, Steph, I know you've got a lot of stuff planned for this weekend, and you made this extra time for us. I appreciate it. Listen, if there's something we can help with, let us know. But if you guys are interested in anything that AgroLiquid's doing, there's some really cool stuff within Total Acre. Give these guys a call. Steph, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate you coming in this morning.
Yeah, thank you for having me out today.
You bet. Have a great week. And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in today to this episode of the Total Acre Podcast. Hey, if you enjoyed it, you liked the conversation, be sure to subscribe. You know the drill. Spotify, Apple, YouTube. Go give us a click, give us a like. Until next time, though, keep pushing forward. We hope that you found something unique, something powerful here that might help you unlock your farm's potential. We look forward to seeing you next week. Be safe. Talk more here soon on the next Total Acre Podcast.